The Australia's Future Tax System Review, otherwise known as the Henry Review, was released on the 2nd of May along with the federal government's formal response. As promised, it was a wide-ranging review that contains a large number of recommendations, some of which have the potential to impact salary packaging. We'll have a look at several of those recommendations in a moment. But before we do that, it's worth noting that the government's response has effectively divided those recommendations into 3 categories. The first is recommendations that the government will implement. That is, recommendations that will be adopted in the near term. The second is recommendations that the government has not said that it will implement, but which it has not rejected either. So these are recommendations that presumably will be considered in future terms, and again, presumably with a large amount of consultation both with the community and with industry. The third category is recommendations that the government has expressly rejected. So these are recommendations that it has said it has no intention of adopting now or in any future terms. We'll use that framework when we have a look at the individual recommendations in a moment. It was anticipated that the Henry Tax Review would look at the FBT treatment of cars, and it has. Specifically, it's looked at the statutory formula valuation method. This is the valuation method under which different rates of FBT are applied depending on the number of kilometres the car has travelled. At the moment, there are 4 statutory bands that can potentially apply. The Henry Review has recommended that instead of 4, there be only 1 statutory band at 20%. This 20% rate would apply to all cars, regardless of the number of kilometres that they travelled during the year. Now, from a salary packaging perspective, this is a bit of a mixed bag. Some employers will be either better off or unaffected as a result of this change, that is those who are on the 20% or 26% rate currently. Some would be worse off, although they wouldn't lose all of the value of their FBT concession, that is those on the 7 or 11% rate. And then a third category would be employees who don't currently package because they don't travel enough kilometres, but who would presumably review that decision now that they could access the 20% rate. So some employees would be a little bit worse off, although they would still save money through packaging. Most would be either unaffected or would benefit from the change. So while we would see a reduction in the overall value of this concession, we would probably see an increase in the overall number of people using it to salary package a car. Now, this is a recommendation that the government has neither accepted nor rejected. That is, it hasn't specifically mentioned it in its formal response to the Henry Review, but it has left it on the table, if you like, for future terms. It remains to be seen whether or not this is something that a future government would want to adopt. Once again, as expected, the Henry Review looked at the FBT treatment of the threshold benefit. Now, the threshold benefit is the one that is used by employees of public hospitals and not-for-profits to package benefits up to a certain threshold value each year. It's an important benefit, an important packaging opportunity that delivers several $1,000s in tax savings to those who use it, and is therefore obviously an integral part of their budget. The Henry Review has recommended that this benefit be abolished. That is, that the FBT concession be removed so that salary packaging up to the threshold is no longer allowed. There is a suggestion within the Henry Review that this benefit be replaced with direct funding to employers, presumably for the purposes of that employer to then use to fund higher salaries. However, the recommendation is concerning, primarily because there's no guarantee that any direct grant from the government would be easy to obtain, and second of all, whether it would in fact compensate the value of this lost benefit. As a result, there has been a concerted campaign by many employees and employers within the sector to have this recommendation rejected, and that campaign has been successful. The formal government response to the Henry Review expressly rejects this recommendation. That is, it falls into the category of recommendations that the government has said it will not pick up. Furthermore, it said it won't pick it up in any future terms either, so it would appear that this recommendation of Henry is effectively dead. In addition to those 2 benefits, the Henry Review also looked at a range of other FBT items, some of which have the potential to impact salary packaging. Additionally, the government response includes some items that will impact packaging too, so it's worth going through these one at a time. First of all, the Henry Review appears to be angling for an overhaul of the FBT system, under which FBT exemptions are reviewed for appropriateness and under which small or easy to value fringe benefits are moved out of the FBT regime and into individuals' personal income tax returns. This is a somewhat vague recommendation because it's not clear exactly what benefits it's suggesting would be moved out of FBT and into income tax. However, it's unlikely to be the main packaging items like cars and threshold benefits. If anything, it's probably going to be the smaller concessions, things like otherwise deductible benefits, potentially in-house benefits, or maybe the laptop or mobile phone exemptions. If these items were moved out of the FBT regime and into income tax, it seems likely that the concessions that attach to them now, or at least part of those concessions, would move with them. Because after all, if there's a good reason to treat them as exempt from FBT now, then that same reason would presumably apply when they become taxable to individual employees. So it's hard to say, if this were to be adopted, whether or not it would have a significant impact on salary packaging. But at this point, the government's given no indication that this is something that it would consider. What the government has indicated it will implement is an increase in the super guarantee contribution amount from 9% to 12%. This is, of course, the compulsory pre-tax employer superannuation contribution. This increase will see a slight drop-off in salary packaging of superannuation as employees are squeezed out. That is to say, as the employer contribution gets larger and eats further into the employee's concessional super contributions cap, which is $25,000 for employees under 50 and $50,000 for employees who are over. So as the employer contribution becomes larger, then the salary package contribution would necessarily become smaller. In addition to that, the Henry Review has recommended that the FBT exemption for childcare centres on business premises be abolished. This is unlikely to have any impact on salary packaging, as very, very few people package childcare fees anymore. Firstly, because it's so difficult to qualify for the exemption, and secondly, because the childcare rebate is now so generous that most people are better off claiming that than they are packaging their childcare fees. It's also worth noting that even though it wasn't addressed in either the review or in the government's response, that meal entertainment remains on the cards as a fringe benefit that has the potential to be adjusted or amended in the near future. The review hasn't made any recommendations around it, and the government hasn't spoken about it, but we do have a budget coming up in less than a fortnight, and it would be foolish to predict that there's no chance that meal entertainment would be included as an item considered by the budget. So that is to say, while meal entertainment seems to have escaped from anyone's attention in the Henry Review or in the government's response, I think we still need to wait and see when it comes to the budget, because there is some likelihood that the budget will consider it.